For you, I am going to talk about ADHD as a superpower. And you might think I've heard this before. I don't think ADHD is a superpower. It has all these challenges. I don't think it's that. Or you might say ADHD is my superpower every day and every night. I love it. It is amazing. Now, this podcast, this episode, it doesn't matter which side you are on in that subject because I'm going to talk about it in a different way. I'm going to talk about ADHD being a superpower in relation to how a superpower works for a superhero. So it's going to be a very interesting and different kind of way to look at this subject. And so if you're wondering how I'm going to do that and what I'm going to talk about, then stick around. And what I need you to do before I start is going to be press the subscribe button, whether you are on YouTube or on a podcast app. Press the notification bell if you're on YouTube. Leave a like, leave a comment. Okay, with all that being said, let's get into it. So let's talk about it. Have you ever seen a superhero get a superpower in a movie, in a cartoon, in a comic book at all? It's not a very nice process. It's not like, wow, they get the superpower and they are automatically just the best at it and they can do anything and this power is just amazing for them and they have no trouble. Nope, not the case. Most of the time when people get a superpower in a superhero comic book, movie, TV show, they have issues. And I mean major issues because they have this now superpower and they have no idea how to control it. They get it and they're like, well, how do I control it? And you see all their issues and errors and stuff like that. So you may see them, if it's a funny superhero comic, movie, TV show, you may see them like bumbling around or whatever. If it's a more serious one, you'll see them really, really struggle. The one I think about most that is easiest to reference is going to be Spider-Man. When he got his superpower, when Peter Parker got his superpower, he had no idea how to use it. He got it. He got bit by the spider. He got a superpower from the spider. And then he had to figure out how to use it. He didn't have any idea what was going on. He didn't have any idea what the changes were. He didn't know what was going on with his body, anything like that. He got the superpower and he was like, I don't know if this is bad or good. He literally didn't know. And so then he's trying to figure out a way to use all this stuff. And over time, he figured it out, right? But when he initially got it, he had no idea. He just got it. He was like, wow, this is just crazy. You know, I've got these new abilities. I don't know what I can do. And so he had to figure out what he could do and figure out how to do this and that and figure out how to build like web shoot, all this kind of stuff, right? Because he is a genius. I don't know how he is a genius like in high school, but he's a genius. And he could build all his stuff for being Spider-Man, right? That's eventually what he becomes. Now, when you get diagnosed with ADHD, it is kind of an eye-opening experience, right? Like you had no idea you had this superpower or you had this ability or you had whatever you want to call ADHD, right? You had no idea this was within you. And so when people first get diagnosed with ADHD, they kind of freak out. Usually they'll freak out. They'll say, oh, I didn't know I had ADHD. Or they'll say, oh, this explains so much. All throughout my life, I felt like this, and now I finally know. And that happens a lot to superheroes too that get superpowers. They'll like be going throughout life and not know. And then eventually at some point, they'll realize something is different about them. And then the superpower will actually manifest and they'll be like, oh, I've got a superpower. Or ADHD, getting diagnosed with ADHD is kind of the same way. You get diagnosed with ADHD, you don't know what to do. You get diagnosed with ADHD and you're like, what do I do now? I've got this thing that I know I've got diagnosed with, and now I have to figure out how to handle it. I have to figure out how to control it. I have to figure out how to manage it. And I don't know. Are there disadvantages to it? Are there advantages to it? I'm not sure. So you see how I'm trying to relate that You get a superpower? No idea. It's scary. If you actually got a superpower, it would be scary because you would not know how to use it. You wouldn't know the ins and outs and dangers or whatever. So you got super speed. You could run, but are you going to run too fast and run directly into a wall? You wouldn't know how to control it, right? Or you got flight. How are you going to know how to control flight, right? It takes practice. And so the same thing with ADHD. You get diagnosed with, you have no idea what to do. You have to practice. You have to get to understand it. You have to research it. You have to talk to other people who have ADHD, get in support groups, all these different things. And it's all a learning process, and it's very, very similar to what you see in superhero movies, books, and TV shows. As someone who gets a superpower and then starts to learn how to control it. And it's not always an easy process for someone to control it if they have a superpower. They get it and they may just mess everything up. And there's so many instances of that if you've ever watched one. So that's the first point. Now let's move on to the second point. Okay, the next point is going to be that it takes practice. And you might think, oh, I got this great superpower. Just like I said before, you're going to have to practice. And the easiest way I can relate this to someone is going to be like the X-Men movies, right? Like you have these kids and they have this professor and he's there and he's like, hey, you don't have any idea how to control your superpowers. Let me teach you. And so what they do is they practice and practice and practice. And they're in school and they have this thing called the danger room. And it's where they practice their abilities to control their powers. They have no idea how to use whatever power they got, right? They get it and they're like, I don't know what to do with this. And so they practice a lot. And so, in the way that it relates to ADHD, you do have to practice. You have to learn different things, different methods. And because when you have a superpower and all these superheroes, they have all these different superhero powers, right? With ADHD, you have a spectrum. So, one person may have a lot of other symptoms of ADHD, and you may have a lot of these other symptoms of ADHD. And some of them are similar, but some of them are very different. And each person's different. And they take different strategies and take different abilities and take different things to work around to get to the same result. And with superheroes, it is the same way. They are trying to figure out how to do these things and how to work these things and what methods work for them, because now they're bumbling around and they can't do the same things they used to do. They can't live the same way they used to live because now they got this superpower. They're trying to figure out. People are going to look at them strange. And so you'll see them go haywire, right? I mean, see the power go haywire, and then cars are exploding and things are going crazy. And maybe the road is torn up, or maybe a building just crumbles or whatever, right? And just all these things are going wrong. Or it could just be that they just run into a whole bunch of people and just like run off because they don't know what's going on and they can't control it, and they're trying to control it, but they can't. And just like ADHD, you're not sure what to do. You're not sure how to control it, how to manage it, how to do anything about it until you start to learn and practice and figure out your different workarounds and figure out, okay, hey, this is a way I can accomplish this. Okay, hey, this is a way I can accomplish that. Now, a lot of times, what happens is if you are a superhero, you're going to have different aids and things to help you along the way, different things that help you. Like Cyclops, right? I don't know if you know who Cyclops is, but he's this guy that's on the X-Men. He has these beams that shoot out of his eyes, and he can't control that power. So it takes a special kind of eyeglass thing, right? A special visor that he puts on. And why he has that visor on, he can control the power. And then on the side of his helmet or whatever, he has a little control, right? And he controls it that way. He can't control it if he doesn't have that aid. ADHD needs aids a lot of times. And what I mean by that is you need something to help. And whether it's a person, a workaround, something that you know or do or whatever it is, maybe you need a pen and pad around you all the time. Maybe you need a timer. Maybe you need a fidget thing, right? whatever it is, you might need an aid. You might need something to help you, and that is okay. And I think even people without ADHD need stuff that helps. But if you have ADHD, you generally will need other things that are going to help you. You generally will have to find your own way to deal with it or manage it. And just like, again, superhero, they do the same thing. They find their own way to manage things, their own way to manage their superpower, how they're going to walk around in society, how they're going to deal with people, how they're going to talk to people, how they're going to make sure that people don't know that they have it, or how they advocate for it. A lot of times you see the X-Men, they advocate, and try to help people understand about superpowers and mutants and things like that. And so in that case, it's kind of similar because they're advocating so people understand and that they bring down the stigma. Very interesting, right? As explain this, are you seeing how it really starts to relate to having a superpower? Now, next thing you got to think about is this. Have you ever seen two superheroes that have a similar superpower and one is way more powerful than the other one, or they're just way different? Like they have the same power, but they're so different. For example, the Flash. The Flash runs really fast. The Flash can run at the speed of light. And then there's Quicksilver, who is in Marvel. Quicksilver can also run really fast, but their powers, even though they both run fast, their powers are different. Flash is much faster than Quicksilver. Quicksilver is fast, but he's not nearly as fast as Flash. Another example would be Hulk. If you see Hulk and you've seen him and he smashes everything and he's super, super strong, and the madder he gets, the stronger he gets. And then if you've seen Fantastic Four, you know there's a character in there called the Thing, also super strong. Hulk is generally stronger than the Thing because Hulk has no limit on his strength. The madder he gets, the more strength he has. As where the Thing has a limit. Even though it's a really high upper limit, he still has a limit. And they're different. Hulk turns into this green big monster. Thing is this big rock creature, right? So the point is they both have the same type of superpower, and yet they are very different. They're very different of how they do things. They're very different in how they act. They're very different of how much strength both of them have. They're very different in their weaknesses and what things hurt them, what things don't hurt them, and how much they can lift and everything. So I say this to explain that ADHD runs on a spectrum. And so even though one person will have ADHD and another person will have ADHD, they could be completely different in how ADHD affects them and their lives because it runs on a spectrum. One person may have a lot less of ADHD symptoms, and another person may have a lot more severe ADHD symptoms, right? But they still have ADHD, but they are on a spectrum. And so on that spectrum, there's a wide range of symptoms and things and severity of what can happen with ADHD. And that's kind of my point, is that two people can have the same kind of thing, but at varying degrees. And so with ADHD, you may have two people with the same thing, but it will be at varying degrees. And some symptoms will be easier for one person to deal with, and some symptoms will be harder for another person to deal with. And it just depends, and it's individualized to that person. You could have 10 people with super strength in Marvel and DC and all that kind of stuff, comic books, right? You may have 10 characters with super strength, and they, in those comic books, will all be different. Whether it's just a color that is different or completely different as in where their powers come from, how they use them, how they're affected by them, and they're just different in that way, and yet they have the same type of power. And they all generally have a different level of strength, right? Some are stronger than the others, and some are much weaker than the other ones. And that is what I'm trying to get through, is that just like a superhero that has superpowers, two people can have ADHD, and they can have a different spectrum of how severe or not severe ADHD affects their lives. And so it may take more work for one person than another person, because now they have a much more severe effective ADHD in their lives, or one person could have a lot less effective ADHD in their lives, and so that may be easier for them. But I'm trying to relate it as in there is a spectrum. There's a spectrum of abilities. Even though two people are diagnosed with the same thing, there's a spectrum of how much it affects their lives. Just like a superhero and people who have superpowers, even though they have same superpower, there's a spectrum of how much that can affect their lives and not affect their lives. And just another example for superheroes, some people don't know how to control, like if they have two superheroes for super strength, right? If you ever seen Hulk in a movie, he doesn't really know how to control his rage a lot of time. He gets mad and just smashes everything up, right? As opposed to someone like the Thing, who has complete control of his powers and may get mad but is conscious of his ability and will hold back, and not just get raged all out and just keep destroying stuff, right? He'll hold back and say, oh, okay, let me hold back and do this. And so you have two different people, right? One is just all out rage, can't control it, has more strength, but just destroys things when he gets mad, right? And the other one has a lot of strength, but also has more control. And so just trying to show you, same super ability, different spectrum, different how much they have to control, or how much they use different things to control what they're doing, or what workarounds or what things they have to do to control their superpower, right? Okay, let's move on. In superhero movies, comic books, there's generally someone that is going to teach the person. Now, sometimes, not the case. They just stumble through it. The superhero just has to stumble through it and then hope that they learn how to control it. And that's a bad situation. But just like people with ADHD, sometimes we just stumble through it. We don't have anyone to kind of tell us what to do or teach us, and then we just kind of stumble. Especially if you got diagnosed later in life, that may be how you've done it like your whole life. You just kind of stumble through things not knowing what's going on, and then say, ew, I'm diagnosed with it later in life, and that explains a lot of what I did earlier in life. Makes sense. Just like a superhero might just be bumbling and stumbling through life and not understand why until they realize they have a superpower, right? And then if they can find someone to teach them, hopefully they can, then they will advance faster, I guess, and learn how to master their superpower. Or they're just dependent on themselves to do that process as well. But generally, when you have a superhero, they have someone to teach them how to use their power. If you ever seen Green Lantern has to figure out how to control a superpower. Now, what he does is he's part of this like military corps, right? That like patrols a galaxy and defends planets and all this kind of stuff. And so he has a mentor who trains him in how to use his power, use his ring and all this kind of stuff, right? Use his ring powers, this ring that he has that can just like do anything. But it's based on his will. So the stronger that his will gets, the more that he can do, more that he can create, the stronger he is. And so part of his training is understanding how to increase his will, basically. Really control his will, really do, hey, if I'm in this fight, my will to survive is going to be great. And I have to figure out how to harness that into controlling this power in this ring. But when he first gets the ring, he has no idea what to do or how to do things or how to even turn it on, how to activate, all that kind of stuff. He has to learn. And because he's in a Green Lantern Corps, like this kind of military thing, right? They teach him. They teach him how to control the ring because he has no idea what's going on until someone tells him and says, hey, this is how you do that. This is what you need to do here. This is what you need to do there. And then as he learns, he starts to excel at it because his will is really strong. But the thing about it is, when he first gets that power, no idea how to use it right. Just wasn't very good at it. Messed up all the time until he really practiced and practiced and practiced. And the mentor was there to really help him practice. Even when he got really good at using the ring, he still had mentors who were telling him how to do things and helping him get better and better and better. Same thing with ADHD. You're going to be diagnosed with it at some point if you have ADHD, or maybe not. Maybe you just kind of know you have ADHD and haven't had a chance to get diagnosed yet. And then you're going to find someone, hopefully, that will kind of mentor you and kind of help you guide your way to managing ADHD better. Maybe it's a doctor, and you'll have conversations. They'll give you strategies and all these different kind of things. Or maybe, like I said, it's a friend, or someone who has ADHD as well, and you're like, hey, what did you do? How did you do this? And you talk to them, and they say, well, I did this and this and this. And you say, well, okay, well, that's not going to work for me because of this and this, but this over here that you suggested would be awesome for me. How did you do that? And then you have the conversation, and then you figure out some things, and you're like, oh, that's how that works. That's really cool. Okay, let me figure out something else. And your friend may be that person that mentors you. Or, like I said, you get a doctor, and the doctor goes through that process and teaches you that, those things. So just depends on your environment, depends on how you choose to do things. I can't recommend either. I'm just kind of giving you the example of how sometimes, or probably most of the time, if you have ADHD, you need somebody to help you along the way. Even if you're not like that outgoing person, you still probably need to find somebody that can help you along the way. And where you get that help is really up to you. I'm just trying to relate it back to how a superhero does it, and how it's similar to how someone with ADHD can relate to that as well. Okay, let's move on to the last point. No superhero actually masters their power, right? It's an ever-evolving process. Even if they're really good, even if they have like a title of master, or they are just really, really talented at their power, like they can do just these amazing things, none of them actually master it. And what I mean by that is every comic book superhero that you know always is evolving, always figuring out something new with their power, always is looking to improve their power. So yeah, they get a lot of control with it because they've had practice and practice and practice, and they've been through like additional situations and everything, but they don't master it to the point to where they never have an issue, right? They are going to get in those situations, and they're going to have to figure out how to get out of it, even though it's a situation they never have encountered. And at that point, they're like, okay, I've done all these cool things. I know this works this way, this works that way, but I know that there is more to what I can do. And they get in that situation, and they got to push and push and push. And then eventually something new about their power comes up. Looking at an example, again, going back to Cyclops, right? Cyclops has his beam, shoots out of his eye. It's what he calls his optic blast, and he can do all these amazing tricks with his ability, right? With his eye blast, right? There's all these things he can do with it, but he's always learning new things that he can do with it. He's really good. He's gotten really good at just using it and doing these different things with it and bouncing off walls and all this kind of stuff, right? He has all these different abilities, but at some point he gets to a point to where he's like, oh, let me try to do this and let me try to do that. And then he finds something new that he can do. And that is what makes superheroes awesome, right? Because yes, they have these superpowers, but yes, they go through these challenges. Yes, they try to figure out how they can handle their superhero power better, the superpower better, right? Yes, they, may have gotten really good at it, but they never quite master it. There's always another level. Even though they get really good at something, there's still more that they can do, more that they can learn. And they keep practicing and practicing and practicing and figure out something else that they never thought about before, but are thinking about now. And so I just want to encourage you in that way. Just like a superhero, when you have ADHD, you may never master it, right? You may never be to a place to where you're like, hey, I have mastered it. I know everything about it. Nothing will surprise me. There is going to be a situation that surprises you. No matter how much research, you're going to have a situation to where you get to the point to where you're going to need to figure out something new. You're going to need to figure out another way. You're going to need to figure out on the fly how you can solve this issue, right? Luckily, when you have ADHD, on the fly thinking, outside the box thinking is what you do. You probably do it at varying levels depending on the person, but it is a super ability that people with ADHD generally have. They think outside the box. They find different ways. They are saying, hey, I could do it that way, but here's a couple different angles in which I can do it. So I'll try those angles first and see if there's a better way. That may be a solution that everybody needs. You may find something that's innovative. You may find something that no one else has thought about. And that is one way that ADHD can be a superpower for you in those situations. Even like Professor X, right? You've seen the X-Men movies. Professor X, he is the leader of the X-Men, right? Like he has all these abilities. He has like mental abilities. He can do all these cool things. And even he will encounter something and that thing will just not destroy him, but give him a really hard time. And he'll have to figure out, okay, I've got these abilities, but I don't know how I'm going to defeat this. So how do I defeat this? Okay, let's make a plan. So he gets the X-Men together. He said, okay, this is going to be a plan to defeat this, but I'm open to suggestions. Because he's run out of ideas at some point. And he might have an idea, but he might be at a loss as to how he can defeat this thing. And he might need ideas from the other X-Men, which is really like what ADHD is like. You may be at a table and somebody may say, okay, I need to figure out this and that or whatever. And then you can suggest, okay, why don't you try this or this or this? And outside the box thinking. Anyway, I thought that was a good point. Now, looking back at all that, what do you think? Do you think ADHD is a superpower? Do you think it relates to superheroes? Like, I'm thinking it does. I don't know. You have to decide for yourself. But I thought this was a different perspective. I thought it was a way to kind of show the difference in the two, but also show the similarities and show how people have superpowers, go through trying to control it, go through issues, go through stigma. If you're an X-Men and a mutant, you ever watch X-Men movie, huge stigma about humans hating mutants, okay? There's a huge stigma there. And just like when people have ADHD, big stigma about ADHD out there. And so you have advocates that are trying to get more knowledge out there, just like the X-Men in their movies. They have advocates and they're trying to get more knowledge out there about mutants that, hey, not all mutants are bad. There are good ones. And just some of the similarities, how superheroes can control their powers and how ADHD relates in that way. I thought it would be interesting to look at. And hopefully you have enjoyed this look at this different way to think about ADHD as a superpower. Let me know what you think. Let me know if it really resonates with you. Let me know if it doesn't resonate with you. Let me know if you like this perspective. All these things would be really interesting to hear about. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day.
And it's a beautiful thing too.